Hey everyone, welcome back to the Lowland Greenhouse here at Carlton Carnivores. I've got another plant spotlight for you guys, and this is a very special outlier species within the tropical pitcher plant groups. The outliers for the Nepenthes are often some of the most simple pictured, but weirdest in terms of like evolutionary history and also just natural history, their ecology, because they often grow in very strange places. And in this case, we have the easternmost and the second southernmost species, and that is Nepenthes vieillardii. This is the only tropical pitcher plant that is native to the island of New Caledonia. And they're still quite uncommon in cultivation, partly because they're really kind of picky and touchy about the conditions that they grow in. In the wild, this is not necessarily a small species, even though they tend to stay somewhat small in cultivation because of their difficulty in growing. In the wild, they can produce vines more than 26 feet in length and pitchers that can sometimes reach 7 or 8 inches tall. So a pretty impressive plant overall. Now again, the only species that is native to New Caledonia and is found across most of the main island there. And they grow from sea level to roughly 850 meters in elevation, give or take, so a little under 3,000 feet at their highest elevation. And everywhere they grow tends to be very, very open environments. They will sometimes grow on bare rock, within open grasses, the edges of the odd tropical pine forests that grow in New Caledonia as well. And most of the soil substrate that they grow is open lateritic soil. So it's kind of this iron-rich clay-type soil. And we'll get to why that becomes important with their cultivation a little later on. But they grow in very open spaces, and because of that, they often develop really, really thick, kind of waxy leaves. These leaves can grow up to about a foot in length, give or take, and they develop they're attached decurrent to the round stem, so the base of the leaf actually wraps around slightly and then runs down the sides of the stem little ways before it opens out into an open kind of oblanceolate shape, very kind of rounded, almost peltate tip to the leaf in some cases actually. This leaf here, it's actually got a slight bit of peltation, and I just dumped the picture out there, but we'll deal with that in a little bit. But these leaves tend to be, they can range from bright green, your standard leafy coloration, or in the case of like the one that I have here, some variations will actually develop very rich kind of red flushed leaves. And that's most noticeable when you look at the undersides of the leaves, particularly on older ones, where the underside develops this rich rusty reddish coloration. In some versions, those leaves can almost be purple. They develop in lower pitchers, they can get fairly long, but oftentimes the tendrils actually stay fairly short. And then, of course, they come down to the pitcher, which in these guys, it's not the most elaborately structured. It's not the flashiest of pitchers, and they vary in coloration, so they're not all the most interesting or colorful, but they get the job done. They do resemble somewhat Nepenthes mirabilis, which is probably one of their closest relatives, and probably what they evolved off of as they split off in New Caledonia. But they also somewhat resemble the lower pitchers of Nepenthes madagascariensis, mazoalensis, pervilli, some of the other outlier species as well. So either a retained ancestral trait for how most Nepenthes looked, or there's some sort of pressure on those outlier species that makes them evolve towards this same similar appearance. The pitchers are stocky, semi-cylindrical. They tend to be ovate in the lower half to 2/3 of the pitcher before it comes up to a very slight hip and then opens up slightly above that. They have simple, flat wings with fringed edges that run right up the front of the pitcher, up to the mouth, which is roughly ovular in shape, slightly teardropped, and it has this nice, very kind of thin, flat peristome that rings the mouth there. And again, the coloration can be fairly variable. Most forms tend to be kind of orangish or rich red in coloration, like these guys, fairly red. Some variations may actually darken to this really deep purple, almost black coloration. Those are quite impressive, and they're usually on the plants that also, unsurprisingly, have the deepest red leaves as well. So, variable coloration, but relatively simple pitcher build. The upper pitchers, as one might expect, are much paler and also a little bit larger than the lower pitchers. They can grow to be about 21 centimeters, so about 7-8 inches tall, and they tend to be kind of ovate to broadly funnel-shaped in the lower half. They very slightly narrow, if they narrow at all, and they may be fully funnel-shaped all the way through, or they have that narrowing and then they open up to be slightly funnel-shaped again, kind of again reminiscent of, say, Nepenthes pervilli, or some of the odd variations of Nepenthes mirabilis, of course. Or, in fact, they probably best described as looking like a cross between Nepenthes pervilli and mirabilis. And those pitchers tend to be very bright green, sometimes yellowish tint to them. A few of them may have kind of a reddish-orange flush that comes into the pitchers as well, but they tend to be much brighter, much paler, more interestingly shaped, but less colorful than the lowers are. And so those guys, of course, trap different groups of insects, the flying species that are attracted to those brighter pitchers. The lips actually tend to often have a little more coloration, just like on the lower pitchers here, which have a darker red coloration on the peristome. The upper pitchers will often have, if they have green pitchers, they will often more commonly have red around the lip of the pitcher as well. Now, when these guys come into cultivation, they're not the flashiest species, which is one reason why they're uncommon, but because they are one of those odd outliers, they're still fairly sought after by a lot of people, but they're difficult to grow because of the soil that they tend to prefer. Again, they grow in that lateritic, clay, rocky soil, so that's something that you have to kind of replicate in cultivation for these guys to do well, because if you put them in your standard, like, sphagnum or peat perlite mix, they often tend to experience root rot very easily because they like that. They need a fairly stable median moisture, something that maybe dries out on occasion, because they do experience droughts in the wild. There's seasonal, monsoonal drought systems that come through. So during certain times of the year, the soil actually dries out a fair amount. But that lateritic soil does retain some moisture down deep, and so that's kind of what these guys expect in cultivation as well. And if you look here, what I am growing these guys in is actually almost pure akadama. There's a little bit of sphagnum that I have mixed in here as well, just for a little extra moisture retention overall, but the primary component of the soil that I have these guys in is akadama, the fired clay, and that pretty well mimics the laterite soils that these guys grow in the wild. So that is something that you have to get to make sure that these guys do well in the long term, because that soil, even if you soak it, it's going to release most of that excess moisture and it's not going to stick around, and it's going to retain just enough moisture to kind of stay a little bit damp, but it's never going to be wet, and that allows the roots to breathe well and spread through the pots and establish these guys to be the happiest they can be. And because, again, these guys are a lowland species, but they're also the second southernmost species. New Caledonia is still in the tropics, but it's fairly far south, even further south than the Cape York Peninsula in Australia, where Rowaniae, Tenax, and Mirabilis live. So these guys, they experience fairly hot conditions during a fair portion of the year. So during, say, summer here, they'll stay moister, and they're going to have temperatures that are going to be between 85-90 degrees Fahrenheit during the day and mid-70s at night. But in winter, they might actually experience a slightly cooler condition, and again, also a little bit drier. So during winter, these guys might actually experience temperatures that at night may be dropping into the 60s, and daytime temperatures that aren't getting much more than 80 or so degrees Fahrenheit. And so that's something that you have to replicate in cultivation as well if you want the best health out of these guys. Now, in temperate areas like we are, the natural climate kind of does that for you. you simply set the plant wherever you're growing at, and then in summer it gets warmer, in winter it's going to be a little bit cooler. And that's kind of what these guys like. This pot that I have actually sits next to where I have my Nepenthes ericoides near the edge of the greenhouse here, where it's hot and humid right now still. It's summertime while I'm filming this, but during winter, it drops down to more an intermediate condition. So temperatures that are a little bit cooler, humidity actually bumps up at that time of year because as temperatures drop, the air is not able to hold as much moisture. So the same amount of moisture in the air is going to result in a higher humidity rating at a cooler temperature. And that's kind of what these guys like. Keep them moist, keep them under bright light as well. Again, in the wild, they grow in very, very open environments, and so that's also what they expect in cultivation. You could grow them in just about full sun if you acclimate them right, or underneath the strongest artificial lighting that you can provide. And that is what is going to give you the sturdiest, the thickest, waxy leaves. If you look close, the leaves actually do have a slight indumentum on them as well, and mature plants actually get a little bit fuzzier. But that helps protect them from that strong light that they're expecting, and that will give them the best color, the sturdiest leaves, and of course, the biggest, healthiest pitchers. And that's what we're all looking for, is those cool pitchers. Now, like all Nepenthes, these guys are also dioecious plants, so if you want to propagate them, first off, you may see it looks like there's 3 plants in here. Really, it's just one, but it has produced other basal shoots off the base here that are forming into new vines. You can take those and cut them, set them in either water or temporarily moss, or in wet acadama soil and allow to root that way. I have not tested this. I don't know how difficult this species is to root from cuttings, but I would expect it's not going to be quite as easy as some other species are because of its requirements for just moist soil and not wet, otherwise rotting, which usually wet soils are the best for getting initial rooting going for a lot of species, but you can test with that and see how that goes. Or if you're lucky enough to have multiple clones, you can hope for having a male and a female plant. Of course, the male plant you'll need pollen from, and you can store that in the freezer if the female is not flowering at the exact same time. The females, of course, will produce a stalk probably seasonally, and that's another thing why you want those seasons, is that may help trigger these guys to flower. And so you get the female flowers producing, and again, like a lot of other kind of outlying species of Nepenthes, their flowers are a little bit different. They're a little bit simpler than other Nepenthes, a little shorter buds oftentimes, but otherwise fairly similar in structure overall to the rest of the genus. So the flowers will have simple tepals, the ovary sitting in the middle, the stigma on the tip, which the pollen goes onto, and if it's successfully pollinated, several months later, the pods will have elongated and filled with seeds. Those will get sown on the soil surface, and then of course you have the 3, 4, 5-year wait as seedlings sprout and slowly grow up to a sizable, manageable plant. So, the easternmost and second southernmost species, and the only New Caledonian native Nepenthes. Not the flashiest necessarily, but with these red pitchers, it's still quite a pretty plant, and especially if you get one with those nice red blush, deep green leaves, it is still quite an attractive plant to grow. Still uncommon, but if you're lucky enough to find one, they're usually not the most expensive species of Nepenthes to get a hold of either. Just a little bit uncommon to see sold because they kind of come in flushes from tissue culture from like Borneo exotics every now and again, and not constantly available. But that is about all that I have for this species, though. If you guys have questions about this plant, things that I might have missed, things you would like more clarification on, certainly make sure to leave them in the video description or the video comments below the description. If you'd like to learn more about the plants, animals, and stuff that I work with, though, in the video description there will be links for all these things that I'm going to be talking about, but you can find my website, carltoncarnivores.com, where the database and blog are at, and you can get information on a lot of the plants and animals that I work with there. On social media, I'm always posting photos and video tidbits and such, and you can find out more about things there as well. If you would also like to help support the production of videos like these, because the time it takes to sit down and do this takes away time from repotting and getting things ready for sale. Video editing also takes time and money. You can consider buying plants or maybe even some of the baby reptiles if you're looking for a new pet from the website. There's the shop there at carltoncarnivores.com. You can also become a Patreon member, where members get early access to the videos like this and also access to things like the monthly seed contests that I do, offering things that you won't find in my website shop, and you can win those simply for the cost of becoming a member. You can also get exclusive merch there and more. Or you can also do one-time donations at Ko-fi or contact me for other ways. Again, the links for these things will be in the video description below. But until next time, I'm Hawken Carlton, and this is Carlton Carnivores.